Ah, childhood. Those were the days. Remember? When it was still okay to enslave people? When your barely non-serfs had to work and eat and sleep on a factory floor for a pittance? Of course, if you weren't born to a Western country, then you actually might recall putting together smartphone parts or farming avocados in this way. But do you know who won't remember this? The people in Western countries who got their smartphones and ate those avocados, and who are currently burning down the shops that sold them, and pulling down statues of the people who literally built the cities they live in, founded the hospitals they are cared for in, and created the scholarships that they used to get a useless university education. Of course, it wasn't okay to enslave people when any of us in a Western country were born, but it was known that stealing and vandalism and even killing were bad. Which is why I find it very ironic that the left liberals tore down the statue of Edward Colston in the UK city of Bristol for something that wasn't a crime or even immoral when he was alive. Well, they managed to become criminals today and do what children know is wrong today. But while that's pretty bad, what I find much worse is that a great many of the institutions of power also seem to have forgotten that these things are bad. It's almost like it's the same kinds of people, the same kinds of ideas that inhabit both the mobs on the street and the people who occupy our institutions. I only wonder how long it is before they forget that slavery is bad, because the rest of us in the UK have known that since at least the beginning of, well, the 1800s. I'll be honest, when I'm not worshipping career criminals or telling people that Mossad makes the police kill black people, I do like to devote a little time to revering long-dead slavers. But I've been so busy having a go with Hitler that I'd completely missed Edward Colston. If there's one thing great about this whole event, it's that him being toppled means that everybody in the UK now knows about Edward Colston and his mass philanthropy. A win for the revolution then. Of course, I really can't know whether Edward Colston was on the whole a good or a bad chap. He could have been a real sociable guy or a total arsehole. But I know that he took money earned in the business that was available to him at the time and used it for philanthropic means. And at a time when Europe, and indeed the world, was still burning people for being witches or torturing people as standard practice in trials, or indeed simply walking into the principality next door and banging a few heads, well, his philanthropy rather sticks out to me as a perfect act in an imperfect world. It's worth pointing out that Edward Colston was born in 1636, before the English Civil War, before the English Bill of Rights, before John Locke's work on liberty. In other words, when Colston was born, England was still an absolute monarchy, and its people were officially at the whims of their God-chosen, poodle-haired Ponce of a King Charles. Trust me, English people are well aware that there was a lot going on in that time that wasn't what we today would call great, and we don't want to go back there. But charity, as they say, does start at home. The English had a lot of their own crap to sort out before they got around to sorting out the people's crap. Edward Colston ended up working for the Royal African Company, a mercantile company that was set up by the royal family, the same one that ruled England, the same one that the tyrant Charles I was a part of, and that the English would several times have to fight and eventually overthrow forever. And it is this for which Edward is condemned by the left liberals, because one of the company's activities was dealing in the Atlantic slave trade. Anybody today who has ever worked for, or profited from, or enjoyed the benefits of a contemporary company that has ever done anything bad, especially such as using sweatshop labour, or relying upon the mining of precious metals in Africa, or exploiting mass immigrant labour, anybody like that is guilty of exactly the same thing that Edward Colston is. That is to say, the crime of being born into an imperfect world, and being an animal, and having to nonetheless live and work and act in that world. And just to be clear, that's everybody that has ever existed. And actually, nobody more than the left liberals, who were descendants of people like Edward Colston. Of course, Edward couldn't have stopped the Atlantic slave trade, nor could he have refused the royal family, nor stopped the African tribes from continually enslaving each other to sell to Europeans and Arabs. But he could use the wealth generated by this imperfect world and use it for philanthropic causes in England. Edward's name is all over Bristol. He gave money to schools, almshouses, to hospitals and churches. And true, maybe he just did it because he wanted the statue. But if he did, then he really messed up, because the statue wasn't built for another 200 years. I don't think he got a chance to join in with the glory. The statue of Edward that was torn down and stamped upon and thrown in a river was allowed to be torn down, and it was allowed to be torn down because the left liberals had made race the only thing that our society is supposed to think or care about. If, for example, in an alternative history, the left liberals were not in power, and instead of race, charitable contribution was the most important thing in society, then Edward would have a statue in every city. And for the record, of course, Edward did not have a statue erected to him because England was celebrating slavery. The statue was erected in 1895 in memory of his charitable work. In other words, the morality of Victorian England, so maligned in art, was far more charitable and appreciative of goodness than the left liberal culture that we have today. But then, that shouldn't be surprising. The left have always been against charity. The idea that one private individual can do a good thing for another private individual, without the state commanding them to do so, well, it's anathema to the very existence of the left. Getting back to how race is the only thing that the left liberals care about, it reminds me of another group of people, another group whose name escapes me, another group who made race the pinnacle of moral and societal hierarchy and justice. No, it escapes. Oh no, that's right, the fucking Nazis. I know that Nazism is the only bit of history anybody quotes, and often wrongly. But every now and again, the Nazis do make an accurate analogy for something around today. And this is one of those times. Our society is literally as obsessed with race as the Nazi one. And it is because of the cultural and ideological control of left liberalism. You know how it is to be a left liberal. You wake up, scroll through your smartphone and think, oh well, the white straight male is controlling the world just so he can hate black people and Muslims and transvestites for some reason. Best go tear down a statue of a 17th century man. Much like the Nazis' racial politics, which were based upon assumptions and misunderstandings and falsehoods about emerging scientific fields like Darwinism, so too the left liberals fill universities with pseudo-intellectual and ideological disciplines to justify their ramblings and violence. And exactly like the Nazis, there are the hypocrites and opportunists in their application of race and pseudo-academic mumbo-jumbo. 2 examples, just to prove the point. The first is that 2 of the great offices of state in the United Kingdom, the Chancellor and the Home Secretary, are currently held by ethnically Indian people, Rishi Sunak and Priti Patel, both of whom are therefore automatically potential candidates to be the next Prime Minister of the UK. Yet neither are held up as examples of the excellent race relations, or indeed, lack of racial division in the UK. In fact, both are denounced by the left liberals, called things akin to Uncle Tom's. But Priti Patel was ethnically denounced with this lovely cartoon. The second example is the murder of 3 gay men in Reading, who were stabbed to death by a Libyan Muslim who was known to the intelligence services. This has barely been covered in the media, which is weird, since lockdown is just starting to be relaxed in the UK, and this guy's first thought post-lockdown was to hack up gay people. And during Gay Pride Month. Meanwhile, the people who go to the beaches are the devils. The response from Stonewall, probably the most influential gay lobby group in the UK, was this tweet. That's right, fascist Britain. It's your fault this happened. And don't even think about criticising Islam. Because Islam is a part of the left liberal establishment. And we don't care how many actual gay people have to be sacrificed on the altar of left liberalism. This is our great leap forward. Enjoy. This is a prime example of how even though the left liberals are a disparate group, and will claim that no such ideology or grouping or class even exists, that it very much does exist, and that the people belonging to it are very aware that it exists, and of who their allies are. You might even say they have class consciousness. It is inevitable that organisations like Stonewall become deranged malformations. They won their war long ago, very swiftly actually, just like most of the various equality campaigns of the 20th century. Because by the values of Western countries, there was no way that such equality could be opposed anymore. And so, these organisations have to invent increasingly obscene and crazed problems to attack and therefore justify their existence, alongside therefore their influence and payroll. What is the point of Stonewall today? The UK is wholly accepting of gay people. Except in London, actually. where homophobia is significantly higher than across the rest of the UK. Let's be honest, Stonewall care as much about gay people as Black Lives Matter care about black people. And so, we're back to Edward Colston, who actually did care about other people. Edward acted at a higher moral level, or perhaps more accurately, reached the levels of moral aspiration that was common for people during his time, and, in fact, many people today. And he didn't do this by virtue signalling, but by action. And ultimately, this is all any of us can do. Because all of us are born into a place and time with limits and rules and mores, and we don't know everything. I don't think that history should be judgmental, or used to justify any modern ideologies or opinions. I think that we should study history to learn about people's experience that we don't have and cannot have, rather than imposing our experience upon them. The latter is a good way to learn absolutely nothing. It's simply ideological myth-making. But if you do wish to assess a person's character in history, ask yourself, was this person, given their circumstances, acting better or worse than average? This is the only valid way that history can judge a person, and I hope that future generations are as fair to us. Edward Colston's statue should be put back exactly where it was. He helped build Bristol, founded charities which continue to act to this day. He helped fund the very left liberals' life and lifestyle who today tear him down. But furthermore, his statue should be back to show that the United Kingdom will not be told what to do, in even the smallest way, by violent mobs on the street. Because the destruction of Edward's statue was not a random event, but part of a long ideological battle. It was a religious act of scapegoating, an act designed to scrub away any connection to the past, bit by bit, until all that is left is a blank slate upon which utopia, the left liberal utopia, can be stamped. Especially since it is the left liberals, the bourgeoisie, whose ancestors were the ones doing all of the slaving and pillaging and conquest, a record they are very keen to erase. Facts don't suit them. Of course, the statue won't put back, and it never will be, not until left liberalism is removed from the places of power and influence, because until then, history will be what the left liberals want it to be, and mob violence, absolutely justified, as long as it's in their name. I am very confident of that.